close the door there?
Yeah. Just be quiet. Quorum?
Yep. Okay, welcome to session number 7. And the Viva Voce for Aloysio Campos, who's an alloy, has been working very hard in the subject of economics, and his topic is about the management of the electricity sector by the Brazilian government. And his panel, very distinguished panel here, except for Mr. Rizzoli, who's also on the panel. And then Bruna and Ms. Barber is back for another one. So we thank them very much. And Aloy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you.
Sorry, one last thing I'm supposed to remind everybody, not to move around too much because it makes the filming, the video of it, very difficult. The audio isn't as great. So please stay in your seats for the remainder of the presentation. And thanks very much.
Well, before I start, I would like to thank everyone for coming here, all the students, teachers, and of course my panelists that helped me by looking at my essay and now giving me feedback. So, let's talk about the electricity sector in Brazil. But before, I'll just give a brief introduction of myself. I am 17 years old, and I studied most part of my life in the Brazilian educational system. How did that impact me? Well, in the Brazilian educational system, the students, they are not really engaged in their own learning process because much of the content learned is imposed by the teachers. And therefore, for instance, in the case of writing essays, I would not write an essay that was longer than 30 lines. Then when I came to EEB 1 year ago, it kind of scared me really that I would have to write a 4,000 essay. But even though I embraced the challenge. I am also willing to travel the world and study abroad. My likings are photography, studying from many subject areas, from the humanities to the sciences. I also like to play the drums, explore nature. And areas that I wish to work at are engineering, especially electrical engineering, entrepreneurship, or who knows, maybe play the drums. I don't know. That's really cool. Okay, now going to the research question. I first started my essay thinking that I would focus on the physics of the electricity sector in Brazil. So I was planning to measure solar irradiation for several months, but this idea quickly faded out. Then I got to more geographical approach. So I was trying to look at the geographical aspects of Brazil and how it influenced the crisis. Because the crisis of the electricity sector in Brazil was first started by a water crisis that then influenced on the hydropower plants. They are the major source of electricity that in Brazil we use. But then the geographical approach wasn't really leading to what I expected, because I was making a very descriptive one, and these two research questions were my first when I thought I was doing a geographic approach to the topic. So you see that they were more descriptive than my last research question. When I decided that I wished to do a more economical approach to the topic, because the electricity crisis has many implications in the economy of Brazil, I had to change the question to a more analytical one. So my final question was, to what extent can the management of the electricity sector by the Brazilian government be considered a fallacy? My thesis, after looking at many hours at home from internet sources and economic books to apply economic theory, I could finally reach a conclusion that the management policies of the government in the electricity sector were the main reasons for the electricity crisis to continuously progress in Brazil. But why was that? One of the main reasons was because the government was using of politics when choosing important executive posts that were being run by the president of state-owned companies, instead of meritocracy. And this had implications because these people that were of the confidence of the government, they sometimes showed bias towards the government's decisions. And of course, they accepted the government's intervention on their companies. Electrobras, for instance, is a company in the electricity sector that is major in producing and transmitting electricity across Brazil. It is a state-owned company that has, however, shares on the market. So some of the company's part is owned by investors, another is owned by the government. But because the main part of the shares is owned by the government has a great influence on how the company works. So what happened in Brazil was that immense debts were being created in the sector, and I wish to know why was this happening. And I intended to look at the management policies of the government. The government intended to subsidize the companies of the sector when the electricity prices were naturally rising because of water prices. So imagine if you have a water crisis in a country that is based on production of electricity on hydropower plants. You're not producing as much electricity as you wish. So you have, therefore, to find other means to produce electricity. In the case of Brazil, they decided to choose thermoelectric plants to produce electricity. But this led to a rise in the price of electricity because thermoelectric plants use fossil fuels. So the prices were naturally increasing, and the government tried to intervene on the sector by subsidizing the companies with money from the national treasury. Because the national treasury must also be used to promote a primary surplus in the economy, the national treasury cannot keep lending money to these companies. So the government tried to impose measures that would take money from banks and give to the companies. At the end, immense and more than 100 billions of debts were created on the electricity sector in Brazil. Discoveries that I had during my research were basically that nationalized companies are more prone to inefficiency. I could find the case of a hydropower plant that was being built in the state of Pará, in Brazil, close to the Amazon. It was the biggest infrastructure project of Brazil. And the initial budget was less than 20 billion of reais. And now, due to delayed constructions and inefficiency in dealing with the project, the budget has gone over 30 billion of reais. So we see that, for instance, the construction of this power plant, which was a state-owned project, there was clearly an inefficiency in dealing with the project. And also, economical information of state-owned companies, I could see that there were many times obscure to the eye of the public. When I myself was trying to look at statistical data of companies, I found myself in a difficult situation because many times I could not find any reliable or empirical data about how the companies were being indebted. But then I could, because of that, I could also notify whether the government was promoting populist measures instead of simply incentivizing the industry. Because while many of the specialists that I focused my essay on claimed that the government was simply promoting populist measures, the government, of course, claimed the opposite. It claimed that it was simply promoting a means by reducing the electricity price to incentivize the productive sectors and the industry. But at the end, I could see that even though I could not very well answer this question, the main fact is that today, the electricity crisis in Brazil has brought even an economic issue to be overcome. The government's intervention resulted in the exact opposite of what it wished. So the government was intending to reduce the electricity prices, and therefore it subsidized the electricity companies. However, nowadays we see that the exact opposite has happened because the electricity price has risen. And we see this was a market failure due to negative externality of production. But let me explain this economic concept. The intention of the government was to subsidize the productive sector. But then it created immense debts to now be paid. And the debts will be passed on to the consumers. We consume electricity. And even to third parties. That's why it is an externality. Because not only the people who consume electricity will have to pay for the price of the debt, but also the new taxes being imposed are applied to the common population. Oh, and of course, I forgot to say, it is actually a fun process. I chose a topic that I was really interested in. So for me, it was really fun to research about it, because in my case, I want to become an electrical engineer. So if I could understand how the electricity sector works in my country, that would give me some solid basis to know whether I'm tracing the right path about my future. So my methodology, internet was the main source of knowledge that I could find, because many of the informations, they were mostly published on websites of paper news, and also on the government websites. But I also use the economics textbook. I think I forgot to mention that I don't take economic classes. So it was another challenge for me to make an economics extended essay, because I had to study all the concepts by myself and even apply the theory to the real world. So I also gathered both quantitative and qualitative data from paper news articles and videos. The videos is in the means of was a specialist video released on YouTube that he argues how about how the crisis in the electricity sector has progressed and what was the influence in this panorama. I also gathered websites and economic books evidences. Evidences from economic books was to simply support my claims. So I could find that in economic books, the electricity sector in most countries, it has natural monopolies. And this is very common. Natural monopolies is when the most efficient means to produce a good is by the means of a single company that controls the generation sector and the transmission sector, in the case of the electricity segment. And I also prioritize expert analysis so that I could have a basis of knowledge that would be reliable to my research. And I limited my research from 2001 to April 2016. 2001 because the first traces of the crisis were seen there, and April 2016 because it is a topic of recent implications. So, for instance, in July it was released a news saying that the governments of each state, each individual government of each state in Brazil could get the debts from the companies that are major in each state and pay for the debts. But I didn't put this in my research because I had to limit its scope. My challenges and outcomes now. My first challenge was to, of course, make an economic analysis because I'm not an economics student. Then focus thoroughly on a single subject area. When you're doing an extended essay, you should prioritize a subject area. And sometimes I would find myself between business and management and economics, but I could not do this. So I tried to, as much as possible, focus on the economical aspect of the crisis. Then I had to select trustable sources, and when you're using mostly the internet, this is very, very difficult because you have so many websites with informations, and you have to be very critical whether the claims that you see, they are based on empirical evidence or they are simply carrying some bias that you cannot put on your essay. So I had to deal with unclear and lacking informations. This was another challenge. And my outcomes, mainly, I improved my both writing and analytical skills and also my communication skills. Because when you are writing an extended essay, which is a 4,000-word essay, you're not writing for yourself and for others to read. And sometimes there are people that are not even specialists in the area, historians in the case, or even students. you must be as clear as possible in your arguments. So I could improve a lot my communication skills. Oops. Yeah. Okay, now advice for the juniors. I know that every single student that presented today said almost the same thing, but don't bother choosing a subject that you don't study at the school. Bruna chose psychology, and the school doesn't even offer psychologists to teachers, but even though she challenged herself to do so, because it was a topic of her interest. And so what we see is that you must first choose what is of your own interest and curiosity, rather than simply focus on what your school provides. Also, plan and start early. I think I was one of the students that started my extended essay earlier. I planned my Christmas break to be directed both to a relaxation time and my extended essay working. So I took 2 weeks of 1.5 weeks of the Christmas break just to focus on the research. And I could almost finish my paper. However, I did many corrections later on. But the research was there already after I finished this period that I focused just on research. And then, of course, make an effort and live it. Make an effort in the means that the extended essay is an essential part of the IB diploma. You get up to 3 points when you end up with TOK, and therefore, these 3 points on the IB diploma might be the ones that get you into college. So really, put all the effort that you can in making this essay, and also choose a topic that you can live it. Live it in the means that you get so much engaged in it that you don't want to stop researching about it. That was in my case, I think in Bruno's too. Now going to some personal doubts. This is more directed to my panelists. I just wanted to know how understandable were the economic concepts and the analysis, and also what standard have I reached for an economic approach to the topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Aloy. And maybe when we start with the panelists here, they could address one or both of these questions, and then also questions on their own. Okay? Who would like to begin? Great.
So I can definitely address the first question, since, as you know, I have very, very little knowledge in the topic. I really knew absolutely nothing about this. So first I want to tell you that I think it was an excellent essay in the sense that I feel like I've come out knowing a lot more than I did when I began.
Thank you.
But actually one of my suggestions that I was going to make to you was actually about defining some key terms. Even some that I actually understood because of, I don't know, BSS, but I think it would be really important because I noted down some of them that I can show you. But it was some terms that I saw you were referring to a lot throughout your essay.
Yeah.
So, and I think if you could give maybe a simple, quick definition in the beginning of some of these key terms, it would be really helpful to guide the reader who maybe doesn't really know a lot about the topic.
Okay.
I can show you some of the ones I wrote down later.
Okay.
But yeah, so generally that's what I want to say. I think it was the way you explained it was very understandable because I knew nothing and I feel like I understood it well. So yeah.
Thank you.
Super. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed reading it and I enjoyed the presentation as well.
Thank you.
I think you give a really interesting overview of a very important sector for Brazil. And there is a lot of data and a lot of information in here. You've obviously done a lot of research as well. So I can see you spent your Christmas very well. So one of the things that you mentioned, which I think is at the heart of understanding the economics of the sector, is around the extent to which there's competition in the different parts of the electricity sector, the generation, transmission and distribution. And you also bring in the concept of monopolies and natural monopolies. And I wonder if you could just tell us, because I got part of this from the essay, but I wonder if it could be even clearer, at those three different levels, generation, transmission and distribution, where is there a monopoly in Brazil?
So, Brazil's electricity sector at the very beginning was focused on vertical monopolies, where a single company would control the generation, the transmission, and the distribution of electricity. But then, until present day, there was complete changes, and we see that nowadays the national monopolies that are seen, they are spread throughout the country. So each state has its main national monopoly, because Brazil is a huge country with many states. And the national monopolies, they are more focused on the transmission and distribution segments, and not the generation one.
Okay. All right, so that's really helpful, and maybe having some kind of table in here. If you have time and space and you can get your word count down, to just kind of say for those three different parts of the system, how much competition is there, how much government involvement in terms of state ownership of the different companies, that kind of data would be really interesting.
Okay, thank you.
So, as I understood from your essay, basically governments have they have three aims where it comes to electricity. They want to keep prices affordable because that keeps the population happy.
Yep.
They want to have security of supply so that the lights don't go off. So there's always enough capacity. And then they want to have hopefully environmental sustainability as well. That's a kind of long-term objective. And from what I read in here, it sounds like the Brazilian government has kind of prioritised keeping prices down for quite a long time until recently. And as far as I know, as I remember from economics, there are a couple of reasons why governments might regulate prices. So one is because they think supply and demand will set this market price, but actually we want the voters, the taxpayers, the people to pay less than that because it's good for their welfare, or it's populist, as you described. But the other reason can be that there's a monopoly in the sector, and that the monopolist would be able to charge artificially high prices because they're the only provider of the service, of the good, and therefore they can just push the price up, and the government tries to bring them down to where it thinks the optimal level is. And I think, coming to your second question about the standard of the economic approach, I think you mentioned all of the right topics in here, and you put in all the right concepts. And to get a really good economic grade for an economic essay, it's worth trying to decide, is the government doing it for because there's a monopoly so it's trying to bring prices down kind of reasonably, or is it going beyond that because of populism? So I would try to include a little bit more about, how much is there a monopoly in which bits of the system, and also are they natural monopolies or not? Because that I think is potentially debatable. So in some countries you don't have such big like hydro dams, for example. You have a lot of wind farms and solar farms and thermal, and then you can have quite a lot of competition. In Brazil you have some really big dams, Belo Monte, near Foz do Iguaçu, all of that, and maybe those make it more of a natural monopoly, but I think you could discuss that a little bit more.
Perfect, thank you.
I just wanted to also ask about the claim you're making here about political appointees making bad decisions. I suspect it's true, but I wonder if you could give us any example where more meritocratic appointees, maybe in different industries, would have challenged more to the government. So when the government was putting pressure to do something that actually didn't make sense, that if you had somebody who was a technocrat or who wasn't from the same party as the president, that there's a kind of counterfactual where they would behave in a better way that you would think would be more productive.
Yes, in regards to what you have just said, I even tried sometimes to find empirical evidence of people that, for instance, were committing mistakes inside the companies, and if I wanted to find if I could, any case that the government had put someone that then influenced badly on the company. But I was basing my research on the specialist claims such as Aloysio Kouzak, which not always they were given all the possible examples of the whole context. So it is really interesting to note that if I could actually find a specific case, it will give more, let's say, validity to my arguments. But I will keep trying. I'll keep trying to find. But yeah, it's a very good point. Thank you.
I guess there are two ways you can do it. Either you can say, I think this because specialists A, B, C, D, E say so, or you can find a counterexample like we were talking about. In here, there were a few moments where it felt like it was the opinion that you reached, you know, and so you said it quite strongly. And to say, you know, I think this because of this literature and these things I read would make it even stronger.
Thank you.
Okay, well, after some very piercing insight, I'm going to have a really shallow approach to this. I'm impressed by the amount of work you did and the research. And a way I think you could, without much work, make it a much, much stronger product is to sort of go through, do a sweep through with it and clean up where you're sort of using a false cognate from Portuguese and turning it into an English word and sort of, I'm not trying to make fun of you, but I'm just saying, and in particular, and this just might be a shortcoming of my own, I can't understand the research question. I think I know what you're asking, but when I read it in English, it doesn't quite make sense to me. To what extent can the management, and then I'm just going to skip to the end, to what extent can the management be considered a fallacy? I'm not asking you to change your whole thing, but that it just, what does that really mean? How can management be a fallacy?
Okay, what I was trying to explore in my essay was, first of all, let me tell you how I approached the topic. Again, I first knew that there was an electricity crisis in Brazil, and I knew that there were so many claims that blamed the government for the electricity crisis. So then I found out that the government influences a lot of the dynamics of the sector, and is the agency, the institution, responsible for the management. So what I intended to look was how much was the government's influence, the government's management, creating the crisis, and therefore, if it was, I would call it a fallacious system of management. So I tried to embody this in my research question. To what extent can the management be considered a fallacy? Does it make more sense? No.
I think I know what you're trying to say, but I'm not sure that phrase catches it.
Do you mean that you would think it would be better if you said failure? To what extent can it be considered a failure?
Is that what you mean, failure? Because a fallacy is different. A fallacy is like a falsehood, meaning like mistaken belief. Yeah, mistaken belief. So.
Você quis dizer o fracasso?
I meant, yeah, more or less a failure, because in Portuguese, fallacy can also mean a failure, in some sense.
Then it makes perfect sense to me. So, and this is what I'm going to encourage you to do, and I'm happy to go through it with you.
Yeah.
To find these places where you used a word that works perfectly in Portuguese and doesn't quite mean what you're saying. Okay, so I don't know if you can change it now, but I would change
actually,
fallacy
I
to
think
failure. Now that I know what you mean.
Okay, we have time for one or two quick questions from the audience.
I think I have some more suggestions that I think might.
Do you think you could forward those to him later, and maybe we can get a question or two from the audience? Okay, thanks. Mr. Passios.
Yeah, Lloyd, very good job for your presentation. Unfortunately, I didn't have access to your EE, so I wondered if in it you wrote about the hypothesis that you had beforehand, because I want to pile on Ms. Diamond's remarks. I think that what she means is, did you have any bias before you wrote that? Did you already have answers before you researched? did you end up with a certain result because you were already looking for that? You know, so did you write your hypothesis in there? If you did, how did you answer them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because how I got to the topic was through mainly paper news that talk about debt that were increasing in the sector and how the government was influencing. Maybe and almost certainly there was a bias on those judgments, on the claims, because many times I would see that the paper news would just simply state that the debts were increasing and it was the government's fault. But I couldn't find any reason for that. So that's really what I intended to look at my research. The entire essay, I tried to explore how much was the government influencing the crisis and what measures adopted by it led to the current state that we see today with the immense debts.
Thank you.
Okay, and one more quick one, Mr. Allen.
I've never had you as a student, but I was quite impressed by your presentation, so I certainly understand how you became a member of the Honor Society, so I applaud you on that. A simple question. I don't know what the difference between the transmission and the distribution is of electricity. What was the difference?
Okay, so the electricity sector begins with the production. So you can have hydropower plants producing electricity, or thermoelectric, solar panels producing electricity, eolic plants. But then it goes to the transmission, which are largely, which are in some, let's say, summarized way of explaining the lines of high tension, of high kilovolts that come directly from the production lines to the distribution lines. When the transmission lines reach the distribution lines, the electricity is distributed to the general population. And sometimes the electricity that comes from the transmission lines, they don't go to directly to the distribution lines, because some industries in Brazil, there's a law that allows industry to buy directly from the transmission lines, which is cheaper. So the transmission lines would be the medium between the production and the distribution.
So right now, all three groups are managed by the same.
Well, the management of the sector works by the implementation of policies that, for instance, regulate prices, and also the institutions that were created by the government to promote the most efficient way of transmitting and generating and distributing electricity. However, we see that there are still privatized companies. It's not all state-owned. So I don't, was that a question if it was all state-owned?
Well, that's confirmed, yeah. So right now, it's managed in three different groups.
Yeah, the government itself has, for instance, an agency called ANEEL, which is the National Agency of Electrical Energy, which intends to create laws that regulate the system. So in some cases, the government influences a lot because it has the possession of most shares of state-owned companies. So there's a huge influence. Or in some other cases where the companies are privatized, there's just a regulatory influence.
Okay. Thanks very much.